the Valkorian Imperial flagship Sovereignty limped back to port with damage that should have destroyed it. Catastrophic failures across primary power systems, hull breaches in 3 separate sections, navigation completely offline, weapons arrays fused solid and useless. The damage assessment was grim: minimum 6 months for repairs if specialized components could even be sourced, possibly 8 months. Possibly never if the structural integrity was too compromised. Queen Velrissa had been aboard during the pirate attack, barely evacuated before life support failed completely. The flagship was her symbol of authority, her residence when traveling between systems, and now it was a wreck occupying valuable dock space. The Royal Engineering Corps examined the damage and delivered their report with appropriate deference and deeply apologetic tones. Repairs would require at least 8 months, specialized components on 6-month backorder from manufacturers across 3 systems, and funding that could commission a small fleet. Alternative was building an entirely new flagship, which would take even longer. Velrissa was furious, not at her engineers, who were simply reporting reality, but at the situation itself. At being without her flagship. At the vulnerability this created. At the visible symbol of damage floating in dock for everyone to see. She grudgingly moved operations to a secondary vessel while Sovereignty sat in port, dark and broken, a reminder that even the most powerful could be hurt. Then, 3 weeks later, an impossible thing happened. Station traffic control reported that Sovereignty had powered up, was running full diagnostics, and appeared to be operational, fully operational, ready for departure. Queen Velrissa stormed into the dock personally, her long, elegant ears pinned flat against her skull in the Valkorian expression that meant she was both confused and extremely displeased. Who had accessed her flagship without authorization? Who would dare work on the royal vessel without explicit orders from her engineering corps? What Velrissa found when she boarded Sovereignty made the mystery even more confusing. The flagship wasn't just operational, it was perfect. Better than it had been before the attack. The power systems that had been completely destroyed were rebuilt with modifications that made them 30% more efficient than original specifications. The hull breaches were sealed with precision welds that were actually stronger than the surrounding original construction. Navigation systems weren't just online, they'd been upgraded with algorithms that improved response time and reduced computational load. The weapons arrays that had been fused into solid, useless masses had been completely rebuilt and recalibrated to tolerances tighter than they'd left the factory with. Velrissa's Royal Engineering Corps swarmed over the flagship, running diagnostics, examining the work, and growing increasingly baffled. This level of expertise should have required a team of 50 specialists working for 8 months. It had been accomplished in 3 weeks. By someone. Velrissa demanded answers. Who had accessed her flagship? Who possessed the expertise to do this work? Who would dare make modifications to a royal vessel without permission, without oversight, without even reporting what they were doing? The dock supervisor checked access logs, growing increasingly nervous as he searched. Finally, he found it. Only one person had accessed Sovereignty during the past 3 weeks. Only one set of credentials in the security system. Maintenance Technician Designation MT-7743. Species: human. Name: David Tors. Velrissa had never heard of him. Her chief engineer looked profoundly embarrassed. Your Majesty, Tors is. He works 3rd shift maintenance. Basic repairs, cleaning, routine inspections of non-critical systems. He's not certified for major systems work. He shouldn't have had access to your flagship at all. Someone must have failed to restrict the authorization properly when the vessel was damaged. Find him, Velrissa commanded. Bring him to the throne room. Immediately. Along with my entire engineering corps and anyone else who wants to explain how a 3rd shift maintenance technician accomplished what 50 specialists said was 8 months of work. The throne room filled quickly. Valkorian nobles, military commanders, the entire 60-person Royal Engineering Corps, dock supervisors, and various station personnel who'd heard something extraordinary was happening and wanted to witness it. And one very confused human maintenance technician who'd been pulled from his shift and told that Her Imperial Majesty Queen Velrissa required his immediate presence. David Tors stood in the center of the throne room, surrounded by hundreds of Valkorians, wearing maintenance coveralls that had seen better days and still holding the tool bag he'd been carrying when security found him. He was 5'10", unremarkable by human standards, and absolutely tiny compared to the 8-foot-tall Velcorians surrounding him on all sides. Queen Velrissa sat on her elevated throne, positioned so she looked down on the assembled crowd. Her long ears were pinned back in that expression David's minimal cultural training suggested meant she was extremely displeased about something. The room fell silent as Velrissa stood. "Who fixed my ship?" she demanded, her voice carrying through the hall with absolute authority. The silence deepened. The entire Royal Engineering Corps stood there, none of them claiming credit because none of them had done the work. Nobles and commanders exchanged glances, equally confused. David slowly raised his hand. "I did, Your Majesty. I'm sorry if I overstepped boundaries or violated protocols. The work orders said the flagship was scheduled for 8-month repair cycle, but I looked at the damage assessment and thought I could fix it faster. I didn't mean to cause any problems or step on anyone's authority." The silence in the throne room became absolute. You could have heard a dropped tool echo. A human, a maintenance technician, third shift, no formal certifications for major systems work, claiming he'd fixed catastrophic damage to the royal flagship in 3 weeks as what? A side project. Velrissa's ears performed a complex movement, shifting from that pinback anger toward something else. Intense focus, maybe, or profound confusion. "You looked at damage that my Royal Engineering Corps, 60 certified specialists with collective centuries of experience, assessed as requiring 8 months minimum to repair, and you thought you could fix it faster. Alone in 3 weeks, while working your normal maintenance shifts." "Yes, Your Majesty. Well, I did work some overtime, and I had to fabricate a few custom components because the standard replacements would have taken 6 months to source, and I thought that was inefficient. But yes, I fixed it. I hope that's okay. I didn't think anyone would mind if the flagship was ready sooner than the official timeline." Someone in the engineering corps made a strangled sound. Queen Velrissa descended from her throne, something she rarely did, an action significant enough that her entire court took notice. She approached David directly, and he had to crane his neck to look up at her considerable height. "You fabricated custom components," she said, her voice carefully controlled. "You modified my ship's power systems to be 30% more efficient than original specifications. You upgraded navigation algorithms. You rebuilt weapons arrays to tolerances tighter than they left the factory with. You did this alone, in 3 weeks, while working third-shift maintenance on other systems." Her ears tilted forward, the intense focus expression David had seen in cultural training materials. Why? David looked genuinely confused by the question. Because it needed to be done? The work order said minimum 8 months, but that seemed really inefficient when I looked at the actual damage. Most of it was catastrophic, but not actually that complicated to fix if you approached it correctly. He shifted his tool bag nervously. "The power systems just needed a complete rebuild, which sounds terrible, but it's actually simpler than trying to repair individual damaged components. You start fresh, do it right the first time, and you're done." The hull breaches looked bad, but they were actually pretty clean breaks, straightforward to weld if you have the right equipment and understand the stress points. Navigation was mostly corrupted software rather than damaged hardware. The weapons arrays were fused, yes, but the underlying systems were intact, just needed to be pulled apart and rebuilt properly. David paused, seeming to realize he was rambling to a queen in front of her entire court. It was all fixable. Just needed someone to actually do the work instead of writing 8-month repair timelines and requisition forms. "I thought maybe I could help. I like fixing things. Your flagship is really well designed. Working on it was actually enjoyable once I understood the systems." He looked down at his coveralls. "I'm sorry if I wasn't supposed to access it without proper authorization. I saw it sitting there broken and I couldn't leave it like that. It seemed wrong to let something that well-made stay damaged when I knew I could fix it." The throne room was absolutely silent. Velrissa's chief engineer looked like he was reconsidering every choice that had led to this moment. Several nobles were staring at David like he was some kind of alien species they'd never encountered before, which, technically, he was. "You fixed my flagship," Velrissa said slowly, because you couldn't stand to leave it broken, because you like fixing things. Yes, Your Majesty. And you fabricated custom components in your quarters because sourcing standard replacements would take too long and seemed inefficient. Yes, Your Majesty. I have a small fabrication setup, nothing fancy, just basic equipment I've collected over the years, but it's adequate for what I needed. Velrus's ears performed a movement David had no cultural reference for. Her court was murmuring now, shocked whispers, fascinated discussions, people trying to process what they were witnessing. David Tors, Velrusa said with absolute authority, you will accept the position of Chief of Royal Engineering, effective immediately. You will supervise all work on my personal vessels. You will have unlimited resources to build whatever fabrication facility you require. And you will explain to my current engineering corps how you accomplished in 3 weeks what they assessed as 8 months of work. David blinked. Your Majesty, I'm not qualified for that position. I'm just maintenance. I don't have the proper certifications or formal training, or you rebuilt my flagship in 3 weeks. Alone. As a side project while working third shift. You made it better than it was before it was damaged. That is the only qualification that matters. Velrusa's voice carried through the throne room. Do you accept this position? David looked at the hundreds of Valkorians staring at him, looked at his worn tool bag, looked back at the Queen, who was offering him a position that should go to someone with actual credentials and formal training, and probably a lot more than a small fabrication setup in their quarters. I accept, he said quietly, but I'm going to need significantly better tools than what I have now. Velrusa's ears lifted, an expression David would later learn meant satisfaction or approval. Whatever tools you require, you will have. Whatever resources you need, you will receive. You have demonstrated capability beyond any credentials or certifications my engineering corps possesses. Now you will teach them how you think about problems. Years later, the story became legendary across Valkorian space. The human maintenance technician who fixed the royal flagship in 3 weeks because he couldn't stand seeing it broken, who worked overtime during third shift to rebuild systems the Royal Engineering Corps said were beyond quick repair, who stood before the Queen in coveralls and admitted he'd done it because he liked fixing things and thought 8 months seemed inefficient. David Tors became a revolution in Valkorian engineering, not through dramatic inventions or spectacular new technologies, but through a simple, relentless focus on actually solving problems instead of writing timelines about why problems were hard. His approach was straightforward. Look at what's broken, understand why it's broken, fix it in the most direct way possible, and don't waste time on bureaucracy that doesn't actually help repair anything. Under his leadership, the Royal Engineering Corps transformed from a formal, credential-focused organization into something more pragmatic and effective. David didn't care about certifications. He cared about whether you could look at a broken system and make it work again. Some of the Corps' most experienced engineers thrived under this approach. Others, who'd spent careers writing reports about why things were difficult, quietly transferred to other positions. The flagship incident became case study in engineering schools. The impossible repair timeline that was actually accomplished in a fraction of the time because one person looked at the problem without preconceptions about how long it should take. When asked about that day in the throne room, David always told the same story. She asked who fixed her ship. The entire engineering corps was standing there silent because the official answer was nobody. It wasn't supposed to be fixable that quickly. So I raised my hand and told her I'd done it because the damage was actually straightforward to repair if you approached it correctly. I thought I was going to be arrested for unauthorized access to a royal vessel. Instead, she made me chief of royal engineering. I'm still not entirely sure that was a proportional response, but I got significantly better tools out of it. And Queen Velrusa, when asked why she'd elevated a human maintenance technician with no formal qualifications to lead her engineering corps, gave a simple answer that became famous in its own right. He did what my entire certified, credentialed, experienced engineering staff said was impossible. He did it in 3 weeks while working third shift. He did it because he saw something broken and couldn't leave it that way. That ability, to look at an impossible problem and solve it anyway because the alternative is leaving something broken, is the only qualification that actually matters. Everything else is just paperwork. The room had fallen silent when David raised his hand. But what followed from that silence was a complete transformation in how Valkorian engineering approached problems. Less focus on credentials, more focus on results. Less time writing reports about difficulties, more time actually fixing things. All because a human maintenance technician couldn't stand to see a well-designed flagship sitting broken in dock when he knew he could fix it. "Who fixed my ship?" the Queen had asked, and when the quiet human in coveralls